defendant and all counsel. You may continue.
Ms. Violet, I know that we talked about victims of abuse and how in your practice you've seen them not file police reports or not tell the doctors what actually happened. Have you ever seen situations of what happens when these victims of abuse come to trial to testify?
It's approach.
Ms. Violet, in your practice, have you spoken with many women victims of abuse?
Yes, I have.
And you said that you've counseled these women as well, is that right?
Yes, I have.
And in speaking with them, have they talked to you about whether or not they're able or have been willing to make police reports or report their abuser to the police?
Yes, they have.
And have they talked to you about whether or not they have been willing to seek medical treatment when their abuser has harmed them in some way?
Yes, they've talked to me about that.
And have they talked to you about when they've been called to testify? About,
yes.
Is that a yes? Okay.
I'm sorry.
And when they talk to you about these things, what do they say about police reports?
Many of the women don't make police reports. Some of the ones that do change their minds when the police actually come out, and they might change the story if they've called 911. They may come back. Some of the women actually follow through. It sort of depends on where they are in that whole progression.
Of the relationship?
Of the relationship. But some of the women absolutely follow through with the police report.
And then have they talked to you about, if they followed through with the police report, have they talked to you about what happens if they're called to testify against their abuser?
Yes. Many of them recant. I think we have about, this is what I've been told by the court, that there are about 80%.
Sustained.
Have you worked with the courts before?
Yes, I have.
And when you work with the courts, what have you done?
Well, we had a domestic violence court in Long Beach.
Yes.
So the judge would meet with us on and off. I have consulted on some cases. I'm not sure, are you talking about with the...
Well, in order to have knowledge about, you were going to give us, I think, a number or some sort of what happens when
right.
women recant. How do you have that knowledge?
I have that knowledge because I've talked not only to people who run battered women's shelters, but also because I know some of the judges, or I knew some of the judges. We had a domestic violence court, and the judge is in Sedona now. She moved, and so we don't have that court anymore. But when we had it for 8 years. And they gave us information about what they saw, as did the shelters talk about what they had seen, and the victim advocates, because they're victim advocates in the court.
And then that information plus you speaking with these women yourself, right?
Yes.
And so what happens when these women get to court? You said they recant. What does that mean?
It means that oftentimes, and I would just like to say that frequently there's a long period of time between when a case is filed and when it gets to court. And so it might be a month, it could be 2 months before it actually gets into the court process. And during that time, if the couple stays together, many of them have reconciled. So you could...
So what happens when a couple reconciles then, with regard to the woman wanting to testify?
She doesn't want to testify because she doesn't want her partner to lose his job, or she doesn't want that on the record. And in California, there are a lot of fees associated with proceeding. There's a Penal Code 273.5, which is called corporal injury to a spouse. And if you plead nolo contendere, that you're not contesting it, or you are found guilty of 273.5, you have to do 52 weeks in a batterer's intervention program, a minimum of 52 weeks. You have to pay a fine to a battered women's program. You have to pay court fines for going through the court process. You have to do community service, and depending on what you do, depends on how much community service you have to do. And you also... you're on probation for 3 years. Can be reduced. You can file to have it reduced to 2 years, but you're on probation for a period of time. During that 1 year period, you also have to come back to court every quarter with a court report from your program to show, what you're doing and how you're progressing in that program.
And so how does that affect women, whether they recant or not?
It affects the family financially. It also affects the women depending on how angry the men are that they have to go through this process. And in my group, some of the men are very angry and blaming their partners for being